the Collingwood champion alongside of me. Bucks, far away.
We're still playing around the edges here a little bit before the season proper, but a couple of observations from the weekend. The first one for me was the spirit that the Melbourne Football Club played with on the weekend. Once again, scoreboard doesn't really tell you much on practice match situations, but I was interested to see how they fronted, how they connected, and what energy they played with. And I was really impressed with the way they went about it. More so than the way they played the game. They definitely had their intercept game going. Their patterns back out of that forward, in particular in the first quarter, were excellent. There was grunt inside. Gawn was up and about. Connection inside 50 looked to be improved. But it was more so the spirit and the connection. Young blokes, old blokes, they looked like they were into it. They looked like they were energised. They don't have to be for a practice match as such at that level. But if I'm a Melbourne supporter watching that, I saw positive signs that if that is what pops through the surface in a game, and a game that means nothing, but if that's what pops through the surface after the headlines of recent weeks, then I'm relatively encouraged by that, because there's one or two ways you go, I reckon, when you're in the situation that Melbourne are in, and you compound and you break down, or you come together and you decide that you're going to go and do something about it on field.
See Simon Goodwin after the final siren, out on the ground, quite animated, high-fiving, hugs. I thought that's a sign that there was some uncertainty about it, I thought, and to it wasn't a big over-the-top celebration, but it was okay. That meant a fair bit to us for a practice game, and I was completely agreeing with you. I thought definitely that, and the depth that they showed through the midfield as well. Some other numbers running through there, Sparrow and others.
Young Windsor, Chandler started really well.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I just feel that you can create the us against them mentality, and it can take you so far. But in the moment, if it's there and it works and you feel it, well, then you can run with that. So Melbourne may be in a position to do that, but I thought their spirit was excellent. Second, I want to go back to Adelaide and sort of back over this one a little bit. Their leadership group is large, there's no doubt about it, and there's some relatively obscure guys from a top-end A-grade perspective that you see there. Murphy, Fogarty, who's come into it, Hinge and Miller, to name four that have been included onto that leadership group. But every single one of those players, they played. They had each of their 8 leaders play, which is a small win, and they all played their roles extremely well. O'Brien, ungainly, but had a massive game. If the captain Dawson wasn't best on ground, well then he was. Miller and Hinge off the back were excellent. Murphy and Keys as forwards kicked a couple of 3 goals between them. Lots of score involvements and lots of touches. Fogarty did his job, and Brodie Smith was quiet. Now, moment in time against no one. I don't in terms of West Coast, still going to struggle through this year, but not household names, but very effective at what they do. And I love the way Adelaide do it. They are doing it differently. They don't care. I don't care about the perception. And I think that's a really powerful thing, that they're making really strong decisions based on really solid values, it seems. And, we'll see what happens in the next, 24 games.
Yeah, so my criticism was, have they fast-tracked these guys too early? So Hinge, much improved player last year, but I'd love to see him consolidate. Miller has had a shocking run with his body. Is it time for him to then have the added responsibility? Murphy, I think by the end of it, will be fighting for a spot in the best 22, because Saligo will be there, Pedler will be there, Mick Henry will be there. They've already got Rankin, they've already got Richelli. So it's an awkward situation if you're in the leadership group but not in their best 22. Now, that hasn't happened yet, and as you said, he was good on the weekend. O'Brien, Keys, they're not, as you say, household names. No. Keys has been impressive for a while now, and I like the way he goes about it, but did they need the added responsibility, or would they have been better off just going with a streamlined group? Let's say Dawson led,
like
Smith
they did
and
last
one
year.
other. Yeah.
Like they did last year. They had 4 last year. But I think the other thing it speaks to is these decisions are made towards the back end of a pre-season. You're not going to reward anyone who's had a poor pre-season or who hasn't contributed to the group or has themselves in who doesn't who hasn't been able to get themselves to a career best physical preparation or a career best prep through an entire preseason. And these boys must have. If I'm an Adelaide Crows fan, I'm looking at that saying these are great signs.
Oh, no, there's a lot of good signs at Adelaide. I just didn't think that was one of them. What about, we've all been speaking about the evenness of the competition. You've touched on it already, but you think it may not be so.
Yeah, just short and sharp again. I mean, you work out who's been in the top four sides, who's going to be in bottom four teams. I actually had a quick look at Robbo's ladder, and I thought he's pretty accurate, like in terms of the way I view it as well. It's still question marks out on Gold Coast. How are Richmond going to come together? Where are Western Bulldogs going to go? They could be a top four side. They shouldn't be, but they could be a bottom six side. But you just can't escape the reality of the established, mature lists that have got a depth of talent that are going to be in the mix. Collingwood, Brisbane, Port Adelaide and Melbourne for me. Then you've got Carlton and GWS, who are the form teams at the back end of the year, who I think are extremely talented and have a depth, have coped with and handled injuries even last year and probably going to be even in a better situation this year. So I think they're the lists that are strongest in terms of maturity, depth and talent. And when you put them up against a North or a Hawthorn, and even at West Coast, West Coast, the premiership players are still there, but you drop away from there. There's a big gap before you get to the youth. So it's like there's a big hole in their list. So you can't expect that lists like that, even if they get the most out of themselves, they're going to struggle to become top 8 teams with the list the way they are, and they need time to mature, they need time to develop and to fill those holes before they're going to be able to compete against.
And then Fremantle, and you've had a fair bit to do with, and then Essendon, just the rung above, I guess. That's where you've got them?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And obviously you've got to consider game plan. You've got to consider momentum shifts in season, and I suppose the wherewithal to be able to handle that. Leadership plays a really important part to be able to minimise your downturns, and you will have them throughout a year as a club, as a team. And individuals will have moments where there might be headlines, and you got to get yourself through that. And the best way to get yourself through that's with performance and wins, because all of a sudden that goes away. But there's leadership becomes crucial in that as well. But when you're just looking at a pure list in terms of maturity and talent, there's some standouts there, and that's why they'll be at the top of the ladder.
Working our way through the Buck stops here this morning. I want to speak about talent Bucks as number 4.
Yeah, look, just looking at, obviously we've spoken about Harley Reid and the focus on him, but the conditions for success for him in his first 12 months or 24 months are not the same as other top 10 picks. And the one that stood out to me on the weekend was Riley Sanders. Now, Bulldogs are in whilst they didn't play finals and whilst they haven't been able to reach what we believe is their very best, they're still a side that have got a lot of talent, and they've prospectively can be a top 4 side. So Riley Sanders drops in, has 30, just looks like he's comfortable. He's found a niche there, position for himself there, potentially in the midfield. A couple of the Western Bulldogs established midfielders don't play, and he steps up and he puts his hand up. So the Riley Sanders as a pick 6 versus Harley Reid as a pick 1. Their circumstances for success around them are very different, and we need to consider that when we look at the type of player that we're actually seeing. Harley Reid's a winner. He's always been a winner. I spoke to someone who's grew up around him, coached him, and he apparently just needs to be the best at everything. So this is going to be a real challenge for him to go through, the next 12 to 24 months. How is he going to handle it? This might be the making of it. It might help him grow and mature and understand and not take things for granted. It might make him a better product, even better product in 24 months' time. But it's going to be some hard yards.
I think it's a really good point. And Adelaide had a target on his back. Like already in a preseason game, undoubtedly Adelaide have said, all right, let's not make it easy for this guy. Now, it wasn't anything untoward, but Rory Laird tackles him in the middle of the ground and dumps him, and then has a little bit of a wrestle on him off the ball once he was dropped, and he just wasn't expecting it, and he fell to the ground. The umpire didn't pay a free kick, but they definitely have said, whether it was just the players or whether it was a target from the club, let's not let this guy have a big head and get ahead of himself. Let's make it difficult for him. He's in the big league now, and that's what's going to happen. It's not dissimilar to Horn Francis in his first year at North. It was really, really tough for him for a number of reasons. Goes to Port Adelaide, surrounded by the midfielders, and his performance went to the next level. So I had it written down with Sanders. I think the impact that he can have is similar to what Will Ashcroft did before he was injured at Brisbane. I think that's the type of role that he'll play, and he'll be a really important player for the Western Bulldogs, the same as what Will Ashcroft was for Brisbane last year. I think he can have an immediate impact, which is unusual for a midfielder to come straight in and do that. Here's Luke Beveridge.
Jack Watts was another one way back when. You think of his first moment on the football field, he was gang tackled by 3 Collingwood players coming off the bench. So there is a target on your head in many ways.
Here's Luke Beveridge speaking about Riley Sanders pre-game.
What you probably saw last week, he in traffic, he sees things outside, in his periphery, and he finds it, and he's highly skilled. He really covers the ground, and as for all the young guys who've ever come through our club since I've been our coach, he's probably the most advanced out of anyone. So he's playing today, and hopefully he goes well, and he sets himself up for round 1.
Seen some good ones, yeah. So it's a fair endorsement from the coach of the Dogs, who's now been there for 10 years. You got one to leave us with?
I do, and it's a potential new segment. This is a little bit different. So it's a little bit without context or outside of the context that we've heard from this individual. So I want to tell you a story about Tarryn Thomas. In 2019, he was a young kid, obviously on the North Melbourne list. It was a Christmas break down in Tasmania. He's in Hobart, and a club player sponsor, a female who's a business owner up in Launceston, had a mother, 85-year-old mother, who was diagnosed with cancer, and she was sick. So young Tarryn Thomas, off his own bat, drove 3 hours with flowers. I got flowers, dropped in to see this player sponsor and her mother, sat with her for 3 hours, had a cup of tea or two, chewed the fat, and then got back in his car and drove 3 hours back to Hobart to spend the rest of his Christmas break. The 85-year-old lady subsequently passed, sadly, through COVID, and Tarryn was beside himself at wanting to get down to get to the funeral. He wasn't able to do so. So I tell this story without context as an observation. I know it to be true. It is from a leader who was once at North Melbourne at that time. Tarryn has had his issues with attitudes, communication with females at times, and he's been criticised for such. He's a young man. He's not perfect. He definitely needs to adjust his ways. North Melbourne and the AFL have made it clear that we can't abide by his behaviour, and I agree with that. But he's not all bad, and there's obviously some goodness in the kid, and I hope that he can find his way back to show us his talent at another club in another time.
Jimmy Webster cleaned up Jai Simpkin after he had disposed of the ball. Simpkin was clearly affected significantly by it. Whether he was concussed or not remains to be seen, but he had a sore neck and didn't take any further part in the game. Bucks, last year, Jordan De Goey did something similar. I called it a weak act. You disagreed. I'm saying this is also a weak act. Do you agree with that now?
How many weeks did you reckon Geordie should have got?
I thought at the time he should have got 4, so he ended up with 3 for the hit on Elijah Hewitt. Now, the reason I say it was similar, I think Webster's is slightly worse after watching it again yesterday, but the ball had been disposed of. Both players left the ground. Both players bumped their opponent high in the head, and both players were knocked
the closer
out.
One is the Pickett one. It's not been 12 months now. The Pickett, where Bailey Smith is kicking the football, so very similar position to Jai Simpkin. The approach of Pickett was very similar and in terms of angle as the one that Webster came from. They both left the ground and both made, pretty solid contact to the opposing player's head. So and Pickett ended up going for 2 weeks for that one.
But the reason, because he wasn't concussed, for whatever the outcome of it is factored in clearly, and Bailey Smith got straight up. And there was one more that sort of has been overlooked, and it was round one last year. Shane McAdam got 3 weeks for a hit on Jacob Ware. Now, Ware had the football at the time, but it was a violent bump. Very similar sort of motion, except it was front on, and McAdam got 3. So in the space...
Well, McAdam went really low in that one, and it was nearly like the head only made contact off whiplash, but that was McAdam's 3. That was as big as we've seen that hit for a long time.
Having said that, so if the goey is 3, but it should have been 4, you can't in the space of, and the incidents are very similar, you can't in the space of less than 12 months double a penalty for an action like that.
Well, it's
So
going to
there's
be more
been-
than doubled.
So you think you'll get 6 plus?
Well, I think if use the word hedge. Now, hedging is a financial term about mitigating against downside financially. I think the AFL have hedged because they're mitigating against a downside of financial penalties in regards to legalities, but it's also to protect better the players that are playing the sport against concussive effects. And we've seen with Angus Brayshaw what can happen, the worst case scenario. Paddy McCartan, Paul Seedsman, etc., etc. It's happening more and more.
We knew this last year, though. Like,
We did.
This isn't new information. So how can De Goey get 3 halfway through last year for an incident very similar, and then 8 months later we're going to more than triple the penalty? There's no new information here. We knew all of this halfway through last year.
No, correct. But that's how quickly
Things change.
things can change, and it's quite clear. I thought the Sam Powell-Pepper decision was a significant shift in the way it was argued, and the addition of changing community standards, which basically says the AFL that we are listening, not just to the people that we've got a class action coming up against us in regards to concussive effects, the effects of concussion in our sport, but on the community. Grassroots football, changing community standards has been wrapped up into all of that. I thought Powell-Peppers was 2, maybe 3. If you thought that he had a case to answer there, when it came down as 4, I thought, okay, well then we're on here. And Jimmy Webster was aware of that. All AFL players were aware of the way that came down. I was really surprised to see a player do what Jimmy Webster did, and I see that as at least twice as bad as what Powell-Pepper did in his actions.
It's amazing how quickly it has changed. Even and I think people say, well, you can't use past ones as a precedent, but I think you have to. Like 2022, Tom Stewart, 4 weeks. Like 4 weeks, Tom Stewart on Prestia. Now, what is that now? Is that 10? Because that's worse than what Webster did. So I think it's to change so quickly. It's like saying, last year you can get 3 demerit points for a speeding fine, and then without telling anyone, you get done for a speeding fine a few months later because it's a new year, and they take 7 demerit points off you. I just think, I get all of it, but I think a 10-week suspension for that after Jordan De Goey got 3 would be ridiculous and unfair. Pickett's was violent. Pickett's was a violent act. Now, there was no concussion involved, but he got 2 weeks. This is last year, early stages last year, and De Goey was halfway through. McAdam's the same. So I think it probably lands at 6. I think you're right, and we all move on, and no one's going to complain about 6, and hopefully it doesn't happen again. But it just goes to show how far we were behind last year, and how
potentially, yeah.
Yeah, well, we just were. Jordan De Goey left his feet, bumped the young kid high, who was knocked out and left the field, and he got 3 weeks. And now we're saying the same incident or very similar, someone's going to get 6.
Yeah, I don't know how you could, when you weigh up Sam Powell-Peppers and Webster's, how could you give Powell-Pepper 4 and only give Webster 6?
Oh, whoa. So you think you'll get more?
Well, I just think if that's what the standard that you've set, I don't think I mean, and that was a point I was making yesterday. Anything over 6 weeks is is an outlier result. Like, that is a marquee result. We've seen very few of those. Alistair Lynch, 10 games after his last game in a grand final. So that was not served, but it was on the way out. Obviously, Andrew Gaff was the 8 weeks. Stephen Baker, way back when with
Stevie J.
was nine games, and that was for a few different things that were going on at the time. And Solomon on Ling was at 8 games. That was an elbow, and that was seen as we really want to stamp this out. And I went back a fair bit for Barry Hall and Brent Staker, but that was a king hit. That's pretty much a king hit. That was 7 games. Like, we very rarely see Toby Green, I think, got 6 weeks for umpire contact. Like, they're massive. They're massive penalties. I mean, Webster's going to cop whatever he cops above 6 is massive. But you put it against Powell Pepper, who got 4. 4 is massive. It's unbelievable how big that penalty was.
Yeah, when you consider all the factors going into that. Like, he definitely had a different decision to make, and that was his error. But right into the last minute, he was coming into tackle, and the player was slung into him in that moment. We still play a pretty tough game where everyone comes at you from different angles, and there's different events that can contribute to the contact. I mean, even just how much it has changed from the Dangerfield collision in the grand final, where he raised his elbow, he got nothing, and knocked a player out cold, and that's only a few years ago. So, yeah, I think the AFL has done a pretty good job of showing that they're really serious. But to think anything more than 6 off the back of what we saw last year, not 5 years ago, not 8 years ago, this is last year. To think we're going to more than double a penalty for a similar incident would be a big move.
Because that's the thing for me. 12 months ago, Pickett jumps off the ground, hits Smith in the head. Now, Smith doesn't lie on the ground. He gets straight up and he gets moving and plays it out. Now, Simpkin doesn't do that. But if you take the result out of it and look at the action itself, it is the identical. It's pretty much an identical action as Pickett's, which got him a 2-week suspension. Now, the very nearly identical action from Webster is got to be minimum 6 based on Powell Pepper's result. I think logic says it's got to be up 7 or 8. Kingy's asking for 10, and I think Kingy's he's been ahead on this. He's always been on the side of, hey, which you sort of, you always become sympathetic for the players. Now, there's 2 players in this, there's Simpkin and there's Webster, but 8 weeks is a long time to miss football. I don't know. Does the lesson need to get that big? Do you need to execute one to educate 100 or to educate 1,000?
Well, you would have thought that was last week.
Ross Lyon line.
Well, you would have thought that was Powell Pepper last week, wouldn't you?
Potentially.
Yeah. My 6th observations from the weekend, Bucks. I really liked the spirit of North yesterday. I thought they flew the flag with the right amount of aggression after Simpkin was cleaned up by Webster, and they kept it up for the majority of the game. They didn't go over the top. I reckon Scott may have given away a free kick in the middle of the ground when Larkey was having a shot for goal, but other than that, I thought the spirit of the team after that incident was about the right level of aggression.
Yeah, agreed. And Webster was actually in a similar situation that Simpkin was on the far boundary line about a quarter later, and the North Melbourne player just played the game. He didn't get caught up with trying to pay back.
Number 2, are we not paying holding the ball this year? How much time are we going to give the player with the ball to get rid of it? There was 6 or 7 in that Saints North game yesterday. Stone Cold got them, and the umpire just lets it play, and the ball sort of squirts out. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about if you let it go too long, the likelihood is that the tackler is going to dump the person with the ball into the ground, and that's going to affect head knocks. If they are done, if they are pinged, if you've given them reasonable time to dispose of the ball, pay holding the ball, because I thought the tackler wasn't rewarded yesterday. Watched Fremantle and Port Adelaide very closely. That was on Friday night. They have to be all in to land Logan McDonald. Now, Logan McDonald is not perfect as a key forward, but it's Jaya miss or nothing, which is saying something at Fremantle. They're still searching for a forward since Pav. Now, he didn't play, Jackson didn't play, and they looked lost. They had no options forward of the ball. They've got first-round draft picks loaded to have a crack at him, and they would know this. Perth boy, I just think they need a big target to help a miss out in the forward line. So if it was a miss, if it was Logan McDonald, and if it was Jackson a bit forward, how good does that combination look as opposed to what is currently there at Fremantle? And it just may be a little bit tough if they suffer some injuries this year.
Agreed. At certain times, one player in one role can make a significant difference to a team if the rest of it is mature. And I think you're spot on there with Freo.
It was good to see Matt Crouch. So a couple of players turned back the clock. Like Matt Crouch, I thought he's going to struggle after his best and fairest winner. He was a mainstay in Adelaide's midfield for so long. Then he lost his place. Even last year, struggled to get back until late. But he just looks to have worked on his game. He looks sharp. He looked clean. I thought his disposal was excellent. And he's definitely conscious of being more penetrating with the ball. So I thought he was a nice one for Adelaide.
Is he in their best midfield when the dust settles?
Yeah, I think he is. Although Berry was the other impressive piece of that Adelaide game. Now it was West Coast. Berry was hitting the scoreboard, and he's a bit scrappy. And so how they fit Laird and Dawson and Crouch and these players, Schomburg when he comes back in from that Achilles, they have options. And then there's going to be Rochelle, Rankin, Pedler playing a bit more time on ball. I'm with you on Adelaide. I just think they have a nice mix. And Butts was impressive as well. So him coming back off that soft tissue. And Borlase is good, and they've got Worrell's down there. Michael Laney's he's an excellent player already in year 2, and then Murray. I saw him at the gym the other day. Murray, he's confident he's going to be back pretty soon as well. So Adelaide are in good shape. The Thilthorpe injury hurts, but the other one as well in the same piece as Crouch was just Ollie Wines. He's just a good football, just a good person to have around the footy club. Ollie Wines, just a great citizen. And he looked really sharp. So if they can get him back playing on ball, I think that's going to be exciting for them. We just spoke to Sam Mitchell, observation number 5. So you've been big on this. I remember you saying he's going to have to find a different string to his bow, Ginnivan. Like he kicked 41 in 2022. A lot of those were from free kicks and burrowing in and under, a lot of work inside forward 50. He's been allowed to play with some freedom by the looks at Hawthorn. I saw him in the second quarter. He got the ball in the back pocket, he kicked it inside, and then he drifted down forward. And in the same piece of play, he was the one that bobbed up and kicked his second goal in the second quarter inside 50. He just seems to be working harder. So, I mean, if you can add that to his game and have a bit more of a license to get up the ground, I think he's going to be exciting to watch. And just finally, can I just a message? Now Ross Lyon's not going to listen to me, but why the hell is Mitch Owens rucking? Why the hell would you ruck Mitch Owens? I said this last year. They put him in the centre bounce. If you want to get your best young player injured, keep doing it. Keep putting him in the centre bounce and keep rucking him. It boggles my mind that Mitch Owens would be a ruck option for the Saints. Let's take our best, most promising, future captain, exciting player and put him up against a player like Cherry in the ruck and get a knee right in the guts, like happened to him last year.
Did Bontempelli not ruck for a period?
Well, it's ridiculous.
Did Scott Pendlebury not do it? Centre bounces is very different to around the ground.
Well, he went in the centre bounce yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. And you would feel that they would be looking for some tactics and strategies to avoid Mitch Owens doing a centre bounce. But he is a big, strong lad.
Let's take Toby Green and put him in the ruck. That's what it's akin to. Like, how dumb is that? And now, once again, they're not listening to me, but I hope that was just one off where Marshall went off of the blood rule and they couldn't get anyone else.
Would you prefer Max King to go in there?
Yes, because at least he's 200 centimetres. It's the same thing. It's the same dude.
If you had a choice of not having Max King or not having Machito Owens, which way would you go? I'd
put Schoenmakers in the ruck before I'd put Owens in the ruck. Just someone with a bit more size and that is a bit more dispensable than Mitch Owens.
Schoenmakers.
Yeah. He's the left-footed new guy. He's tall. You'd rather him in there than Owens.
Got to be in the side first.
Well, he was yesterday.
Yeah.
Imagine rucking Mitch Owens.
Probably thinking about round 1.
Well, let's put Winks in the ruck. Good idea.